Hey guys, and welcome to the Alabama Saltwater Fishing Report presented by Angelo DePaola, the Coastal Connection with eXp Realty, the first podcast to bring you the local inshore, offshore, and onshore fishing report, whether it's good, bad, or ugly. We have a great show lined up this week, but first, let's see who's making the show possible. This week's Alabama Saltwater Fishing Report brought to you by Great Days Outdoors magazine. If you hunt or fish in Alabama or the Deep South, you know that it's different down here. Spawning seasons, patterns, and food sources are not the same as they are in other areas of the country. At Great Days Outdoors magazine, Southern outdoor writers pick the brains of the best Southern hunters and anglers and give you the best how-to, where-to, and when-to articles, along with so much more. Pick up a Great Days Outdoors magazine subscription and become a better Southern outdoorsman. Great Days Outdoors magazine can be found at your local Barnes & Nobles, Books A Million, Tractor Supply Company, Rural King, Bass Pro Shops, or you can save and buy online at greatdaysoutdoors.com. Also brought to you by B&M Pole Company. B&M Pole Company is the leading manufacturer of crappie poles in the world today. Their product line has evolved to include top quality gear for anglers who fish more than just for panfish, including their Sam Super Salt series designed for shallow water fishing for trout and redfish. These rods will deliver everything you need to catch these inshore fish at a great price. The genuine Portuguese cork handle feels great in your hand, and the exposed blank and touch system will add unbelievable sensitivity. Stainless guides are durable and flow smoothly. Check out their whole lineup at bnmpoles.com. And also brought to you by KillerDock. KillerDock uses marine-grade aluminum to make fabulous fish cleaning tables and stunning canopies that will keep us out of the sun. KillerDock combines durability, function, and design to uniquely upgrade your entire dock experience. Visit KillerDock.com to see more.
Hey guys, and welcome to another special episode on the Great Days Outdoors Podcast Network. I'm your host, Joe Baya, here with my co-host, Butch Theory. And man, you know, Butch, I really like these special shows because it gives us a chance to dive into some of the topics that we don't really have enough time for in the fishing report each week. But these are things that we talk about a lot, we think about a lot. And today we're going to be answering in a very in-depth way the question we've gotten a lot, which is, hey man, what do you think, the best inshore reel is for me to get? A lot of people are looking for the best reel, for a certain budget. Some of them are wanting to get one reel to do it all. Some of them want to have a reel for every purpose in mind. And I don't know about you, Butch, but I'm not scared to admit it, man. I kind of just pick them up, see how they feel. If it feels good, that's just always been my choice. And I'm not saying that's necessarily wrong, but I don't know what a lot of the jargon means.
I definitely don't, man. Especially, I would say in the last probably 10 years, things are so complicated. There's a 72-42 canoe valve, drag
Right.
system on it. It's like, all right, that's cool. As
Yeah.
long as it catches me a fish, I don't really care.
Right. Yeah. I mean, got to make sure the rhombo-nimbus cycle is, centrifugally
Exactly
operating correctly. And we're going to dig a little deeper into that today and find out what you need to be paying attention to, depending on how you fish, what you fish for, how much you fish. To help us out on this topic today, we've got a special guest. Today's guest is C.A. Richardson. C.A. honed his angling skills on the beaches, piers, and inshore flats of Tampa Bay, Florida, while guiding and tournament fishing extensively in the 80s and 90s. Along the way in his guiding career, he saw a need for knowledge, especially with novice and intermediate level anglers who really wanted to learn the finer points of inshore fishing, particularly with the use of artificial lures and the fly. So for this reason, he created Flats Class, which was a popular traveling fishing school and eventually became the launching pad for Flats Class TV. Currently, Captain CA has put his competitive career behind him to get back into the flats and the back country, and his primary focus is on the development of Flats Class and the new Flats Class University online fishing school. CA, welcome to the show, man. So before we get into today's discussion, tell us a little bit more about Flats Class and everything you got going on there.
Well, Flats Class has really been around now, believe it or not, for 20 years.
Wow, congrats.
And that's why there's so much silver in this beard now. It's been around for 20 years, and it just started as a way for me as a professional guide to kind of cultivate a certain clientele that wanted to learn how to fish, and I could fish them with artificial lures instead of fishing them with natural bait. Not that I have a whole lot against natural bait, but there were so many guides in the Tampa region back in those days. I didn't want to have to compete with each and every one of them. And a lot of them had bigger boats than I did because I was a skiff guide. So the artificial and the fly fishing just seemed to be a natural path for me. Plus, I was a tournament fisherman and had been for quite some time at that point in my career. And then I was still tournament fishing. So made sense to start flats class. Never would have believed 6 years later we would have turned it into a television show. And once it went to television, I mean, the thing has just tentacled out into so many avenues or channels, if you will. We have Flats Class University, we have Flats Class YouTube, we have Flats Class the live schools, we have the show itself, we have a podcast now, we have 3 or 4 social media platforms that we put live stuff on there, or we'll put just what's going on. In fact, it's so hard to keep up with it that I basically have my wife running some of it part-time, and my son does all the marketing and he does all the IT stuff behind this. He's really the genius behind how I can be in so many places at once, because the only thing I'm really good at is just being me and going fishing.
Yeah, it's definitely having a great team around you is key and all that. But it's so cool, too, all the different ways you can reach people and help them. I mean, part of the reason that Butch and I created this podcast network is because we had some really great mentors growing up, and we got to fish a lot. And there was just a lot of, we were exposed to it. And there's so many people that want to learn how to fish that just don't have the mentors, and they don't have the time like they would have had when they were kids, like we did, to soak it up. And now they're adults. They're really wanting to get into it. And it's so cool that there's so many different ways to learn now.
Oh, YouTube. I'm addicted to this YouTube stuff. I mean, I dismissed it even as early as just 5 years ago. I was like, it's really not that important. Most of it's probably just for kids. I'm the typical, 50-something-year-old guy. I really didn't put a lot of relevance in it. The only time I use YouTube is my air conditioner is making a noise.
Right.
Let me go on YouTube and figure it out.
Yeah.
Or something like that. But now I realize what an incredible teaching tool, and I wish I would have gotten into it 5 years prior to that. But now that I'm into it, I find myself, this is what I watch most of the time. I don't watch television. I don't watch linear TV at all. I mean, nothing. I've got an 82-inch television, flat screen at my house in the great room, and I never turn it on. Never turn it on. My wife will watch some Netflix series or something like that, but guys, I never turn it on.
Well, you gotta learn how to cast your phone up there.
That's
you
right.
can throw your YouTube up on the 82-inch screen. Then
I never do it. So YouTube is an incredible source of information for people to learn how to fish, learn how to tie knots, understand product review, thing like that. It's just an amazing medium that now I really leverage a ton. Coming from the linear television world as a host for so long, I can't believe I'm saying this, but I can't wait till I can just be on YouTube all the time with most of my material, because I figure everyone's going to cut the cable here, if they already haven't, in the next year or 2 or 3, because why are people going to do that? They want video on demand all the time. I want to watch it when I want to watch it. I don't want to be held captive to a television guide and watch linear TV on, Saturday night, 9:30, Flats Class is coming on. I want to watch Flats Class now.
Yeah,
Right.
totally agree.
You're right about that. Yep.
Totally agree. People are on demand, and I mean that's same thing with podcasts.
Yep.
You're on the road a lot. Being able to just pull out your phone and search for that thing that you may be interested in at that moment, and that really brings us to today's show. I mean, because I'm sure you get this question a lot. I know we get it a lot. Hey, what kind of inshore reel should I get? I'm really into this inshore fishing, and what should I get? And I'm like, ooh, man, that's a loaded question, because number one, there's a lot of vernacular out there that even guys that have been fishing a long time don't understand. Then you've got the baitcaster versus spinning reel discussion that can cause a fight on the dock. So we're going to get into all that today and really try to figure out what's the best inshore reel for what you're trying to do. So let's start with that age-old question of baitcaster versus spinning reel. My big joke is when you get a backlash, it's a backlash. When I get one, it's a professional overrun. But, with baitcasters, I still get backlashes, and I tend to grab the spinning reel just because I'm better, I'm more confident with it. But why would somebody choose one over the other?
For me, and people that really know me and that have been fans of our show for a long period of time, they understand that I'm one of the rare birds that enjoys throwing bait casting gear more over spinning gear, probably 10-1. I really don't throw spinning gear as much as the typical Floridian fishing guide would. The reason for is I have fewer line management, I'm going to say, issues with bait casting, other than the professional overrun that happens to all of us. But other than that, there are no line twists, no wind knot issues. I can use heavier weighted braid to fish cover with a bait caster. You can use shorter rods, which give you better or greater casting accuracy and more leverage with a casting setup. They're lighter. They're much lighter in your hand, when you're making hundreds of casts, maybe even 1,000 casts in a day, because I come from the professional tournament world prior to doing anything else. So this has always been a fantastic tool. I just feel like you have more control over your bait. You have a wider range of gear ratios that you can really play on because you have more bait control because they don't pick up as much line as spinning reels. Spinning reels pick up so much line. Sometimes they'll roll spinner baits over. You'll just crank too fast. You can't get a lip plug down the depth like you can with a bait caster. So there's a lot of technical reasoning behind the bait caster. Now, the spinning reel's strengths are that you can throw a much lighter lure with greater ease. You have to sacrifice the braid weight, go down in braid weight to do that, but you definitely can do that. You can also skip. They're better for throwing natural bait presentations. So there's reasons why to use spinning gear, and both elements have come a long way. When you look at spinning reels now, when I grew up, okay, I'm a 1965 guy. I'm right there at the baby boomer X-Gen line, if you will. The reels we were using were Mitchell 300s and things like that. They were bulky. They were heavy. They had short spools, and they just didn't cast as far as the casting style did. So that's why I grew up throwing those things in the 70s. That's what we grew up throwing. That's what your dad threw bass fishing. And most of my heroes from that era were guys like Rick Clunn, Bill Dance, Hank Parker Jr. Those were the guys I identified with because there really wasn't any saltwater guys to follow back in those days. Other than Kurt Gowdy and the American Sports, we really didn't have anybody. I was watching Bob Cobb on Bassmasters on the TNN network just to date myself. So I never really fell in love with the spinning rod stuff until later on when they started getting better, especially the Shimano Stratic series. When that came out, it was like, oh, wow, these things are pretty cool. You can cast, you can skip, you can do this, you can do that. So those were the reasoning behind what I favor. But now spinning reels are so light. They have the long stroke spool, which allows for super long casts. Their drag systems are much improved. The way they stack line or lay line on the spool, you have less line twist. They have made them so much better that I understand why people want to use spinning gear all the time now, because they've made them great. They're awesome. And the thing that always kind of handcuffed the guy with the bait caster is, oh, I can't throw anything under 3/8 of an ounce. Well, that's not necessarily true anymore. They've got some really sophisticated braking systems in these reels now where you can literally throw Ned rigs on bait casting gear. I have a Shimano Corrado BFS, and that's a bait finesse system reel that they have that only holds 40 yards of braid. And I can throw something that weighs an eighth or sometimes even less on that thing as far as I need to throw it sight fishing. It's an incredible tool. So with the new stuff on both sides of the aisle, if you will, between spinning and bait casting, I'd have to say it's pretty even up now. There are a lot of people, the retailer that I deal with the most where I live, he said he cannot believe the number of customers that come in now asking for bait casting reels that he knows he's sold them spinning reels before, just because they're getting easier and easier to use and be more proficient at it, where you don't have to worry about the professional overrun.
What you're saying there is that basically the technology has made it to where there isn't really one or the other where you'd say, like, for this application, I just have to have a spinning or a bait caster. It's really like you may have to have a certain bait caster if you want to do Ned rig fishing, but it's out there. So if somebody's choosing, let's just start with the spinning reels. There's a lot of vernacular out there. I mean, a lot. What are the questions somebody needs to be asking? And I want to kind of break this down because we could probably talk about this for an hour. But let's just talk about the guy who's looking for the best all-around spinning reel first. If he just wants to have what I'd call the boat rod, that can kind of do a lot of different things fairly well. What kind of questions does that guy need to be asking in terms of looking at components on spinning reels?
Probably the most important thing as an inshore angler that they need to be concerned about is don't look at the price point as much as you look at the features of the reel. Now, I'm a Shimano guy, and I don't hide that. We have an incredible feature called Xpertek. Now, Xpertek is a coating that they put inside the reel, outside the reel. Certain models, we have extra seals to keep water from getting into the guts of the reel. But most of our offerings have this labyrinth, this maze system, if you will, that drains water from the reel. It allows the water to maybe, if it gets in the reel, it can't get all the way past and get inside to the guts because it has to go through this system to get in there. And by then, you probably already grabbed it and got it back out of the water. That is one of the probably the biggest selling points when you're selling a reel, if you're a tackle retailer, that you need to make the consumer aware of is this stuff has to hold up. It has to be reliable. This guy does not want to use this reel in his kayak or in his small skiff, or if he's a weight angler, and use it for 3 or 4 months. And already he's starting to hear the grind and he's starting to feel this stiffness. It's not as quick. It doesn't get that startup inertia anymore. And once they start feeling that, they lose confidence and they think, oh, this reel is a piece of garbage. You don't want them going away thinking that. So the number one thing is the durability of the reel itself. So you got to buy the ones that are kind of built for the marine environment. Don't buy a freshwater reel if you're saltwater trout and redfish guy. The other thing I hear a lot is max drag. Now, I'm going to tell you as a professional guide, the number of times that we nut that drag down to achieve max drag is probably 1 in 1,000. We never do that. It's more to me with the drag is I want a drag system that gives me the widest range with the smoothest change. The worst feeling in the world is for you to stick a PB, a personal best, like a snook, and it runs down a dock line or down a jetty, and you hear that drag start to gap where it's like, and you know it's getting hot, it's swelling, and it's going to break off. It's going to be the zing pow effect here in a minute. By having in the Shimano lineup the cross carbon drag system that they have, it dissipates heat very quickly. It gives you a very wide range of drag micro click settings. So it gives you a lot of options when you're fighting. Even if you're using smaller reels, you still have the opportunity to land the fish. Because if you put 3 or 4 pounds of drag, and everyone's wanting to know, what's the magic setting? Is it 25% of the line strength? Is it 50% of the line strength? For me, it's usually a third of the line strength. And once you set up a system, like in your shop or in your garage, whatever, I mean, I do this for a living. So I literally have like a test center at my house. I set the thing up there and I test it from out in front, just like a fish would be pulling on it. I put the rod in a rod holder and I pull on my reel, my line, to see what it takes. And I do it with a scale. And if I'm using 10-pound braid on a Stratic 3000 and I'm pulling on that line, when it says it's got 3 pounds of drag, 3 pounds of drag's a lot. It really is. I go up to the reel at that point and I pull on it just to see what it feels like coming out. Once you understand what it feels like, you don't have to set everyone with a scale. You'll know what it feels like to pull that drag through that roller bearing, that bail. You'll say, oh, that's about 3 pounds drag. That's perfect. And once you have that familiarity with your gear, it's amazing. And think about it. If a redfish is pulling a 3-pound dumbbell around, he's not going very far. He's really not going to go very far at all. So for me, I consider, is the reel durable? The size and weight of the reel are very important to me. How smooth is the drag? Casting distance is another thing you might want to consider, because if you're in an area where you blind cast a lot of the longer stroke spools, they will allow you to get a little bit more. Now, your rod is very important in this process, but there are reels that will maximize your casting distance for sure. And then I'd say lastly, the balance of your reel with the rod. Lots of times you'll feel it on the rod and it'll feel a little wonky, if you will. And back in the old days, we used to add weight to the back of the rod butt to try to make it feel a little bit better. again, why I'm a baitcaster guy, because I don't worry about that nearly as much because so many of them are built the same way. The weight difference isn't that great. But when you look at the Shimano lineup, at one end, you got the Vanford that weighs hardly anything. And at the other end, you might have something like a Spheros, and it's a much heavier reel in the same sizes. So, I mean, that's a big difference. You just got to pick what you think is the right choice for balance. If you're a natural bait fisherman, you don't care if the reel's a little heavier. But if you're an artificial guy and you're throwing jerk shads all the time and paddle tails and spoons, that weight's going to make a difference with the fatigue factor.
Huge deal.
Huge deal. It's a huge deal.
Yes, sir. I admittedly have just gotten into the inshore game pretty serious in probably the last 3 or 4 years. I grew up on the back deck of a charter boat. Made me think of it whenever you were talking about pulling the drags.
Yeah.
You know, we're used to Shimano 50s and 80s and pulling 15,
That's right.
32 pounds of drag on max, you know. Talking back to fatigue, you know, I fish with a lot of the local guides here, and they make a lot of their own rods, and we throw a lot of twitch baits. And man, at the end of the day, a heavier rod and reel, I mean, your shoulders and your neck and everything is just crushed at the end of the day. And those lighter rods and reels make a huge, huge difference for fatigue.
Oh yeah, and rod speed, as far as being able to deliver a sharp, crisp cast every time. You know, you want your casting, your ability to cast to be as smooth and as sharp and as accurate on cast 22 as it is at cast 222.
Absolutely.
So it makes a big difference. And I mean, when I set a benchmark reel on the spinning rod side, the benchmark reel for me on the spinning rod side with most of my clients and even myself is typically a 3000. That's usually what we're throwing, something in the 3000 size. If it's a casting reel, it's typically in the 150 size. You know, I don't throw a lot of 100s and I don't throw a whole lot of, 200s and 300s. The 200 Corrado XG is a favored reel by me just because the body's just a little wider, the spool's a little wider. And if I know I'm going to throw top water or a big pulp round lure or something like that, I want that 200 because I know I'm going to have, if I have some fluff in the reel because I'm really letting her fly, I got a lot more play with that than I would with a 150. But other than that, I'm telling you, the stuff they make today, when Shimano reached out to me and asked me if I'd be interested in joining that team, I'm going to be honest with you. It was like someone invited me to the North Pole and I was in Santa's workshop. They got some badass toys for a guy like me who really digs this kind of stuff.
So I want to take you back to a few of the things you said. Getting back to weight, it sounded like you said basically if you're a guy that likes to throw a lot of artificials, you probably want to look for a low weight for class reel. If you're a guy that is more of a live bait guy, then you could probably stand to just go with a heavier weight for class reel, and because you're going to be making less casts. Is that pretty accurate?
Absolutely true. And those types of reels, those heavier reels, tend to be more durable over time. They're tougher. They can be dropped. They can be banged. They're just workhorse reels.
And probably going to be on the more economical side.
That's what I was going to think too.
I would imagine. Cheaper. So if you're going to be doing that kind of fishing, you probably don't have to break the bank on every single reel.
Absolutely. And still get good quality.
Yeah, sure.
Shimano made some serious improvements to the Ultegra. Ultegra is a great reel. I use it for a lot of our inshore fishing. The Spheros. And the nice thing about the Spheros lineup now is it goes all the way from the small reels all the way up to the 20,000 size. So if you become a fan and you're a natural bait guy and you really want to use the Spheros, you can stay loyal to the brand all the way up to the 20,000 size. So you can fish offshore, you can fish inshore. It's unlimited. Not everyone has to buy a Stello or a Twin Power.
Right.
I mean, we like to, but you don't have to have a full lineup of that. That would be almost cost prohibitive.
Right. Sure. Yeah. And I mean, you just have to decide who you are and what you're doing. And if that extra cost is going to really make a difference to you in the long run. I mean, I'm always a buy once, cry once kind of guy, but that's if I really need it, So,
right.
You also mentioned casting distance with the spinning reels. If somebody's looking at that and they're saying like, Butch was talking about, some of the fishery here in the Northern Gulf, because there's a lot of guys throwing popping corks. We talk on here a lot about the importance of making long casts. That, I mean, in general, two guys fishing on a boat, the guy that if you're throwing the same bait, the guy that makes the further cast usually catches more fish. So if we're talking about longer casts, what really dictates that? What key components does somebody need to hone in on in the spinning reels?
There's a couple of things. First, it's going to be a combination of that reel with the rod. So the rod to reel balance is going to be essential there, because that's going to allow you to transfer energy, store energy on the back, and then drive it and unload that energy. Now, if you have a reel like a Sustain or a Vanford, something that has that long stroke spool technology behind it, what I mean by that is the way it lays the braid on the spool allows for the line to come off it much easier. And then the materials, the edges of the lip of that spool are designed to allow that reel to cast farther. That's going to be critical. But to have a rod that has a lot of crispness to it, something that it'll heel over just enough so that you can drive. And everyone's different. This stuff's like golf clubs, guys. Someone like me who generates an awful lot of rod speed, I need a rod that might be a little faster or maybe even extra fast to control the cast. Where if I threw something that was too soft, too much of a moderate action, me moving it so fast, it wouldn't even cast as far as it could. But someone that might have shoulder issue or doesn't really have that casting style, they only load it one way in cast, more moderate action or maybe up to a fast action would be better suited for them. But those reels that promote that long stroke spool technology, the way they lay the line, the braid on that spool, and they're not the little short fat ones, and that tapered spool allows that line to come off. So the helix of the line coming off the spool doesn't impact the bottom of the blank going through there, makes a big difference. And those rods that made up with those are really important. That first stripper guide, how many guides it has going down the blank, and inshore fishing, probably my favorite at Shimano would be the Terramar Double X. That rod stores and unloads energy like nothing I've ever seen. There's no twist in the tip of that rod at all. So you don't get that waffling wah, 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 that slows that line down and creates friction. And when I mate that up with a Sustain, if I mate that up with a Vanford or a Twin Power, I can probably cast legitimately 15 feet further than someone else. But when you add up that 15, even sometimes 18 feet, and you extrapolate that through some kind of weird calculator for 600 or 700 casts throwing artificials, if we were throwing spoons, for instance, if you give a guy like me that kind of advantage on real estate, I'll probably end up catching 5 or 6 extra fish that day, because most of the strikes happen the first 33% of the retreat. So me having that extra distance, well, that is a tactical advantage.
Yeah, I like it. Well, you mentioned that you're really a baitcaster guy. So do any of these questions change for you if you're in the baitcaster market? Or are you still thinking reliability, drag, and, like you said, that range and heat dissipation, the size, the weight, the casting distance?
Well, with baitcasters, there are a few other considerations. Gear ratio, because the gear ratio in bait casting changes the lure speed on the retrieve quite a bit. So if you're using something that is a 6.6 or a 6.4, it's going to, for every handle turn, it revolves that spool 6.4 times or 6.6 times. So if you're going to fish a bait that you don't want to roll over, like a spinner bait or a lip bait, or even a lipless bait that you're trying to get down the depth, that's going to be an advantage with a slower gear ratio. So those reels are going to be better chosen for those types of scenarios. Or even if you're trying to fish slow because you're working the bottom a little bit more. An interesting experiment to do with inexperienced fishermen is to have them cast on the driveway and turn the reel like 3 times. First have them cast, let it go out there like 60 feet or so. Then go put a flag next to it or a tennis ball. And then have them take 3 turns, because they think they're fishing slow, on their reel, and see how far that lure traveled over the driveway in 3 turns. They're totally out of the strike zone now. They don't realize how much. And when you do that with something that's a 6.4 or 6.6 versus something that might be like an 8.1, you see a bigger difference again, because it's coming a lot farther. You might be picking up 37, 38, 39 inches of line versus picking up only like 26, 27, 28 inches of line. Well, in 3 cranks, that's another 30 inches. So it makes a big difference. Now, if you're trying to work something a little faster, a speed bait, you're working a paddle tail, a swim jig a little bit faster, especially if you're working over cover like oyster bars or grass, you're going to want a faster reel. You just are. Or if you're sight fishing, where you're going to make a presentation, see a fish, and if you make an errant cast, by the way, I never make an errant cast.
Right.
Of course not.
But if you can make an errant cast, you can pick it up and you can get it right back up.
Well, I don't even know. I didn't even know what you were talking about when you said that.
That's just a dirty word, Aaron. But that stuff kind of works. As far as the drag goes, for me, I don't really pay much attention to max drag. I do want a lot of adjustment in the drag in my bait casters, but I use my thumb quite a bit too to adjust right there at the end. When the fish gets close, I just use my thumb quite a bit. So I usually have my drags a little bit lighter. So the other thing is corrosion resistance. Now, I like, depending on the lure size that I'm using. If I'm using heavier lures, I like the bigger reels. Like I'll go all the way to a Corrado 300 sometimes when I'm fishing for tarpon in the backcountry and stuff like that. But it's usually the reel size. And if I'm going to skip, for instance, I'm going to start skipping baits. Well, I've always been fairly proficient at skipping baits with a baitcaster. But they came out with the Corrado DC, that digital braking system, that chip system. Boy, did that make skipping a whole lot easier with a baitcaster. I mean, I'm telling you, if you've never tried it, you lock that thing down quite a bit. If you throw hard, you're not going to backlash the reel. And that's always been the trick, is being able to lift that rod tip and feather all at the same time while you're driving straight through to get that bait to go right on through. And now with that, it makes it so much easier. It's turned into one of my favorite reels. Now, if I have to go for casting distance, super long casting distance, I do not use that reel as much. But if it comes down to fishing in wind or skipping, anything like that, I love the Corrado DC 150, that high gear ratio.
Sounds like that's what you need, reel. Joe, so you don't backlash so much.
Hey, man.
You get started being a professional.
That's right.
Thing about you talking, CA, you're talking about skipping. We don't do as much of that up here, in the northern Gulf. I think y'all probably do a little bit more of that around the mangroves and whatnot. But we do deal
shooting piers and all,
dock fishing.
Yeah, a lot. Yeah, so we deal a lot with wind. Our best fishing a lot of times is in the worst conditions, and that's what I'm hearing too. Is a big, that being a big plus for those guys that are fishing in those more harsh conditions.
Oh yeah, because you can wind up and throw so much harder. Yeah, it's a good system, and they have, even though that reel price point wise is a little higher than some would expect. Once you use it one time, I guarantee you're going to buy two of them. You're going to buy two of them.
All right, guys, let's take a quick break and hear from some of this week's sponsors. This week's show is brought to us by CCA Alabama, a great way to support conservation projects like the Claude Petite Flounder and Speckled Trout Hatchery in the University of South Alabama Cobia Tagging Project is through the purchase of a distinctive CCA Alabama saltwater fishing license plate. You guys head over to Alabama Department of Revenue's distinctive license plate page at revenue.gov to get yours. And also Fishbites. Check out the full line of scented saltwater and freshwater baits, as well as tackle, at fishbites.com. And also brought to you by Foster Contracting, Fortified Roofing Pros. Enjoy less stress knowing you have reduced your risk for damage with Foster Contracting. Check them out at fortifiedroofingpros.com or call them at 251-447-2978. Before we move on from the ratio conversation, I would like to talk about top water just a little bit. We talked about, twitch baits gear with the high retrieve gear. Whenever you're throwing a top water, walking the dog, are you looking for something, a little bit slower, or do you want to be on the higher end of that retrieve ratio?
That depends. Like if I'm snook fishing, which requires a really quick walk the dog, almost bubbles coming behind that thing. It's got to be moving. You cannot let them get a good look at it.
Yes, sir.
I'll use like a 7.4 or an 8.1. I'll use a faster one. But if I'm slow fishing for speckled trout wintertime where it's click, clack, I can use 7.1's fine. That's a perfect gear ratio for me. I get a lot of solid use out of that one. That's a very good one for me, is the 7.1.
Talking all this about reeling and line retrieve and that kind of thing, and thinking about bait casters, something, and really spinning reels too, something that I've noticed more, probably in the last 5 years or so, is a lot of differences in handle design of what you used to see. So why are those there, CA? I mean, like, what makes one handle better than another?
Well, in the spinning rod world, lots of times that T-handle, I hated the paddle handles that you see on casting reels when they put it on spinning reels, because you make a cast and it's hard to find that little wheel. It's so much easier if your spinning reels have those T-handles. So I love the T-handle, or even the round knobby handle in the bigger sizes, because that power knob is so easy to find so quick. On the casting reel side, it's not so much for me the style of paddle handle that they put on there. I mean, some of them are swept so that they're a little cleaner and a little tighter in the reel, and they're not so wide so that you've got more space to pack them in certain things. A lot of that is the ergonomics of it. But I like the tackiness of almost like a rubberized feel on the paddle, because your hands are sweating, you're casting hard, you're grabbing that. And if they're made out of a hard polymer or something like that, it feels like your hand will slip off them. And I think there's a company or a brand out there called Real Grips, where they would slide that little ridged piece of rubber over the top of those manufacturers that were using those harder polymer paddle handles. And that solved the problem. And they made it so you could change colors. They were red, white, and blue, or they were orange, and then guys started color coding their reels so that they knew what braid was on there and whatnot. But for me, I preferred that tackier rubber type paddle. I like the bigger paddles; they work better for me.
CA, I want to kind of sum up what you said so far. It almost sounds like really everything you said boils down to trying to keep your bait in the strike zone. That's what I'm hearing. I mean, whether it's making a longer cast or a slower retrieve, it's all about trying to keep matching your reel to how you want to present your bait.
That's right. Situational, scenarios that you have to do that. Yeah, I'm giving you a license to spend, guys, as much money as you want. Tell your wives it's okay.
I've already spent several grand.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's like, honey, I mean, go listen to the podcast. He said you can't just have one topwater reel.
That's right.
Plain as day, right there.
You gotta have two.
Yeah, no, I mean, but you're right though. I mean, if you really want to have a purpose-driven reel, this is how you determine what you need. But you've also done a good job of explaining, where you could kind of find the middle ground, that maybe it's not the best, quote unquote, for the task, but it's gonna get it done.
That's right.
But then also get some other things done as well. Because some guys they'll buy every reel for every purpose, and that's great. Some of us we're allowed to have 3 reels.
That's right.
And that is what
right.
we're allowed to have.
Right. Sometimes you got to pick the middle of the road one that does everything well, nothing great.
Right.
Then.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a good middle of the road, and you get a little bit under and a little bit over sometimes.
But one of the things we haven't really hit on is braid versus mono, or even braid versus fluoro. So you were talking about how these reels lay the line down and that kind of thing. Is braid or mono, with your intention to fish either or, is that ever a factor in which reel you would pick up to do that, or which reel you would choose?
Well, the only time I use mono anymore is on casting gear. I do not use it on spinning gear at all. For a while there, I was using it on spinning gear for bone fishing down in South Florida, where I would put 6-pound mono on, but I really don't even do that anymore. What I do is I put about a 15-foot leader on and I just go with 8-pound braid. But for me, if I'm using mono, it's mostly trout fishing. If I use fluorocarbon or mono, it's usually trout fishing. It's usually clear water venues for big trout where you're trying to be sneaky. You're trying to work the bait slow, the fish. And I usually keep one reel in my reel bag that has one of those on there. The rest of the time, I'm actually throwing Power Pro, that V2, that Slick 8 V2. That stuff it gives me greater casting distance, greater line capacity, and it just casts. It's stronger. There's instantaneous, you're tight. And in today's world where the hooks are so sharp, I hate to have to strike a fish. I'm going to be honest with you guys. I rarely hook set a fish now. Most of my stuff is reel as fast as you can, because if you can take all the slack out with braid and come as tight as possible and feel that rod loading and pull back and lift up at the same time without ever stopping, you don't lose fish. You just don't. It's really that simple. So I would say 95% of my fishing now is absolutely braid. And then only 5% where I grew up throwing mono. That's all we threw. Mono, copolymers. And then fluorocarbon came much later, which is a cool technique for finesse fishing, but it's expensive too.
It is. We have a couple of guys in the area that have kind of not gone away from braid, but have ventured out using the monofilament all the way on the spool and spooling the reels with the fluorocarbon as well. And the kind of what they're thinking there is, using the mono. We have one that's older and one that's younger, trying to figure it out. And they fish some tournaments and things. Do you put any weight to throwing, say, top water with your mono, because your mono is going to float and keep it up on top, and so you're working a jig down the bottom for your fluorocarbon? Do you put any weight to that?
Those are good strategies. In fact, when I coach people about topwater fishing with braid, I tell them the shorter section of leader as possible, and make sure it's mono and it will float, and the bait's going to be less toilsome to work, because everything else is going to want to bring that nose of the bait down and sag it in the water. It's going to be harder to work it. You're not going to be able to work it nearly as efficiently. Of course, you'd be able to do it much easier with mono, because mono also has the elasticity, which makes that bait walk even better. It's just that you have to have the right rod action, because if you give somewhere, like you're giving up the stiffness of braid or the no stretch of braid, if you do that, now your rod's going to have to be a heavier action rod when you throw in mono, because you're going to need to get that slack out of that very quickly. So it's kind of a yin yang kind of feel for that. And I know the guys that you're talking about there, I guess you're out in Texas.
I'm in South Alabama.
South Alabama.
Yes, sir.
I mean, those guys like to target those big trout, and when they strike a plug, a top water or a suspending plug, it is nice to have that forgiveness of mono, so that they can't tear a hole in their mouths, and you can fight the fish, and the fish can struggle as much as he wants. He comes boat side. You always lose them one rod length away from the boat, trying to reach to grab them or dip them.
Oh yeah.
And that doesn't really happen if you use mono, but that is a learned thing. You have to learn how to use mono again, because many of the consumers today, or the anglers just getting in the sport, especially, we put so many people in the outdoors in the last 18 months. They've never used mono. That would be weird to them, to feel it, to get the touch and everything. It's different. I love casting mono, because casting mono, especially on a baitcaster, there's a lot less opportunity to have those professional overruns.
Definitely. Much easier to get out,
and you can get them, and you can get them out a lot easier.
That's right. A lot thicker.
Well, CA, I'm sure there's something we're not asking you, and I think you've hinted at it, is that the rod selection along with the reel selection really plays a big part of this. But if we're just talking about reels, what I've really learned today is that the boxes that you like to check off first are going to be all encompassing. We'll call it reliability. I mean, that's going to be durability. That's going to be corrosion resistance.
That's right. Saltwater tough.
Yeah. Saltwater tough. Next is maybe you're focusing on the drag system, and making sure that you've got the most versatile drag system that you can for that reel size class. After that, it's going to be weight, really looking at, depending on the type of fishing that you're doing, you're looking at the weight of that reel as an important deciding factor. And then casting distance.
Especially with fatigue. Yeah, with fatigue, the weight really does matter quite a bit.
Yeah. Fish like you guys do, and you're serious about it, and you're making hundreds of casts a day, that's going to put you into one class of reel, whereas you like me, and maybe you got a beer in one hand and a live shrimp under a popping cork.
Average Joe
fishing. I can go with the heavier reel.
Average Joe fishing. That's right. Average Joe fishing. It's just to each his own on all that stuff. I mean, it's reliability, it's casting distance, it's the drag factor, it's the weight factor, it's sometimes scenario and species considerations depending upon what you're targeting, whether you're a trout guy or if you're going to target sharks or hard running fish like a snook, or hey, someone told you that they're out there on the Dixie bar, there's a bunch of bull redfish. I mean, you've got to think about what gun you're going to take with you that day to accomplish the mission. It really comes down to logic. It's just logic and experience. It's easy for me because this is a flow chart that goes through my head every day. And I usually bring enough in the arsenal under the gunnels to accommodate for that one wild fish that might show up. It's like, oh, dear God, here comes some cobia. They're up behind some, some channel markers or something like that. I got one stick in there heavy enough to do that. So it's nice to have all those options. And then the cost of the reels, it really depends on what you want to spend. Some of us, they don't want to spend $300, $400, $500 on a reel. They want to just spend, hey, what can I get for $150? That's going to last me and service me well, where I don't feel like I'm going to be spending $30 every 4 or 5 months getting the thing serviced. Before I knew it, I could have bought a $300 reel.
I'm glad you brought up the cost, because a lot of guys are working in some kind of constraint where they're saying, hey, like you said, I got $150 I can spend. But now you've done a good job of if they're looking at a lineup of reels that are $150 or less, they can say, well, which one's got the best drag components, is the lightest for its class, is going to cast.
Which boxes are most important to check, basically.
Yeah.
That's right.
Be able to choose the best in that category. I like that a lot. Man, I just really appreciate you breaking down the gear ratio too, because that's one of the things I stare at that number. I'm like, I don't know what that means. Feels pretty good in my hand. All right, I'm going with this one. And now I feel like I really know what I need to do in choosing the gear ratio based on the kind of fishing.
Yeah, I need to do a YouTube video on that on my YouTube channel on Flats Class YouTube. If I do that, it'd probably help a lot of folks out.
Yeah.
Well, I think a lot of guys are afraid to say that they don't know what that means, and I'm not. I'm just fine. I can still catch fish even if I don't know what that writing on the reel means. Right. So it's all good. But man, it's been a pleasure having you on, and appreciate you sharing your knowledge with us here. But if folks want to follow you everywhere that they can, well, where would you point them to? Obviously, we talked about the YouTube channel, but you got anything new coming up?
Yeah, if you want to watch a lot of the properties that we have at Flats Class, just go to waypointtv.com. That's a streaming platform. Our Flats Class University is on there. Our Blacklist podcast is on there, and our television show is on there. That's one of the best platforms going. It's basically Netflix for the outdoorsman. It's just not fishing. There's hunting on there as well, so that you guys that do both, I can see Butch does both. He's got a bunch of dead animals over his head there.
Busted.
I mean, it's a perfect thing. And if you go to Instagram or Facebook or Twitter, just type in @Flats Class TV and you'll find Captain C.A. Richardson. And that's really it. Flats Class YouTube. And if you type in Captain C.A. Richardson or into any search engine or Flats Class, I promise you, I'm old enough where I'll come up a lot on a lot of pages. You won't have any problem finding me.
We appreciate you being on the show today, Captain CA.
Yeah,
It's been very enlightening and very educational. We really appreciate your being on.
Anytime, Joe and Butch. You guys are great. You've been great hosts. Got a great platform. I love your podcast. So I look forward to getting another invite sometime.
Sounds great.
Well, we got to have that rods discussion.
That's right.
That's right.
Next, so
sounds like a sequel.
It does. We'll have part 2.
All right, Cap. We'll be safe getting after them, and we'll look forward to that next discussion.
Appreciate you guys. Take care.
All right, guys, that wraps up another great segment. Y'all take a minute to check out some Fishing Chaos fishing tournaments coming up near you. For Alabama saltwater anglers, you'll want to check out these awesome tournaments. The 2021 Saltwater Fanatics 6th Annual Inshore Championship will be held on September 11th and 12th with the lowest entry fee and the highest payouts. This is a tournament you for sure will not want to miss. Details, rules, and ticket purchases are now available for purchase on the Fishing Chaos app. For our kayak anglers, check out the month-long Kayak Saltwater Series August Redfish Challenge that repeats in September and October. There are Gulf Coast and Atlantic divisions. 5 redfish aggregate length determines the winner. Tickets are available for purchase on the Fishing Chaos app. Also, the 2021 U.S. Kayak Open begins on September 11th and ends on September 12th, 2021. The overall top finisher of the USA Kayak Fishing Open will be offered a spot on the world team and join current world team members Russ Snyder's, Drew Gregory, Eric Jackson, Ron Champion, Cody Milton, Jackson Orr, and Guillermo Gonzalez. This event is the USA Kayak Fishing Team Qualifier, with the top 6 men and 6 women receiving an invitation to join the USA Kayak Fishing Team and attend the next Pan American Kayak Fishing Championship. For more tournaments near you, info and full tournament details, including ticket purchases, can be found online at app.fishingchaos.com/tournament. And also brought to you by Photonis Defense. Photonis Defense PD Pro Ultralight Ultra Compact Night Vision Systems. Simply the best in-class night vision systems ever built. Contact them at photonisdefense.com to learn more. Photonis Defense, Masters of Darkness.
And also brought to you by the Hunting Exchange. Buy and sell your hunting gear securely online. PayPal protected purchases, no hidden charges. Listings are free. Head over to the App Store or Google Play and download the Hunting Exchange app today. Butch, how cool is it that we get to take guys that spend hundreds of days a year on the water, thousands, tens of thousands even, days in their lifetime on the water, and distill down the knowledge that it's taken them all that time to accumulate into really easy to understand concepts. And you could tell that's exactly what CA was able to do when it comes to the topic of inshore fishing reels. What was your key takeaway from today? What did you really learn?
Well, it's not every day you get to talk to a legend, man. That dude, you can tell he is just a wealth of information. I look forward to talking with him, hopefully, and doing that ride sequel. That'd be pretty cool.
Yeah.
Man, I think probably the biggest thing that I took away is I do struggle with spinning versus a bait caster, because it sounds like basically what CA said is nowadays technology is there for both. If you are just a bait caster guy, then that's okay. But if you're a spinning reel guy, then it doesn't sound like you're going to be sacrificing a whole lot one way or another. Is that what you gathered as well?
I think so, but exactly what he said. The technology's there, but you got to make sure that you're getting the right spinning reel for the job at hand. So it's not just because there is a spinning reel that will work well for, Ned rig fishing, like he was saying. Right. It doesn't mean that every spinning reel will work well for that.
No doubt.
That's the key, is understanding what are you trying to do, and then going and finding, if you decide, hey, I'm going to be only a spinning reel guy, that is possible, or vice versa. I'm only going to be a casting reel guy. That is possible, but you are going to have several reels in your repertoire to be able to grab and use. And I think that's where I struggle, is a lot of times I'm just like, well, this is my baitcaster, or these are my baitcasters, and I'm trying to grab one and do.
You're trying to make the
what
rod
I shouldn't be doing,
or the reel doing something that's not supposed to be doing.
Exactly.
My biggest problem is I have to do both, because my left hand does not work like my right hand.
Right.
When I'm spinning setup, I'm reeling with the reel on the left, and I'm working the bait like a twitch bait or a top water with my right, and I just can't do that with a bait caster in my left hand. I can't work the top water near as good.
I've heard that's a sign of like decreased mental capacity, like that you.
Oh, stop.
That's what I heard, man. So, but that's good. I mean, because that means you can use spinning reel.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to have both. I mean, it just is what it is. Whatever. Well, man, what'd you pick up from Captain CA today?
I hit on it a little earlier in the show, but it's always good to reiterate what I really heard him saying, whether he was talking about really all the components of the reel. The different things that you say, all right, well, let's talk about this box of components, is that it's all about presenting the bait the way you want to and keeping it in the strike zone, which is something that I love that theme comes out again and again and again
all the time.
And again, no matter who we're talking to, no matter if they're inshore, offshore.
So I was just about to say, it could be inshore, onshore, offshore.
Man, it's all about getting that bait in the strike zone, keeping it in the strike zone for longer. The guy who keeps his bait in the strike zone the longest is going to win any given day. And matching the type of reel up to that endeavor, I think I understand how to do that now. Where I was before, it was like, I'm just going to the store and grabbing, well, that one's smooth. Well, that one's smooth too. Well, this one's $80 and this one's $130. I guess I'll get the $80 one.
Right. Sure.
There's more to it.
There's a lot to it.
I feel like I'm going to be coming back to the show and listening to it again and again and again to remind myself of these things as I'm going back to, picking up another reel. So hopefully we've answered this question well. We get it a lot. We get a lot of Hey Cap questions related to different types of inshore reel questions. It'd be fun to do this for some of the other types of reels that are out there, but that is going to wrap it up, man. That's going to wrap it up. I think we got this one.
Yep, I agree, man. You guys please subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to podcasts. If you'd like us to email you the podcast each week, just text the word fishing to 314-665-1767. Again, just text the word fishing to 314-665-1767 and subscribe to our email list, and we'll send you the new show each week. And we'll talk to y'all next time on the Great Days Outdoors Podcast Network. This week's Alabama Saltwater Fishing Report was brought to you by Sam's Stop and Shop is your one-stop shop located at 27122 Canal Road in Orange Beach, Alabama. Sam's has a little bit of everything, including a deli, inshore, offshore, and surf fishing tackle. They also have bait, clothing, groceries, name brand sunglasses, and so much more. Stop by and shop or call them at 251-981-4245 today. And also brought to you by the Alabama Marine Resources Division. The Alabama Marine Resources Division reminds all recreational anglers that gray triggerfish, greater amberjack, or red snapper must be reported through Snapper Check prior to landing the fish in Alabama. For more information about Snapper Check, please visit outdooralabama.com. And also brought to you by Test Calibration. Test Calibration is your source for sales and service of diesel turbochargers and fuel injection systems since 1976. Contact them at 800-822-0057 or visit them online at testcalibratindieselandturbo.com. Also brought to you by Advanced Transmission in Spanish Fort. Give the professionals a call who have been trusted on the Gulf Coast for over 25 years at 251-626-6061 or check them out online at www.advanced-transmission.com.
This week's Saltwater Fishing Report is brought to you by Angelo, DePaola, the Coastal Connection with EXP Realty, your boating and beach property specialist. Check me out on Facebook at Angelo DePaola Realtor, the Coastal Connection, or call me direct at 850-287-3440.
And also brought to you by Bucks Island. They have new pontoon boats, bass boats, bow riders, and aluminum boats for sale. They provide boat service on all kinds of boats, even if they weren't purchased from Bucks. Visit them at 4500 Highway 77 in Southside, Alabama, or give them a call at 256-442-2588. And also brought to you by SunSouth. For quality John Deere equipment affordably priced, visit your neighbors at SunSouth. Visit your local SunSouth and check them out on the web at www.sunsouth.com. And also brought to you by Hilton's Offshore Charts, bringing you the highest quality online satellite fishing chart since 2004. Your source for sea temps, altimetry, currents, and watercolor at hiltonsoffshore.com. Also brought to you by Hilton's Real-Time Navigator, bringing you the highest quality online satellite fishing chart since 2004. Your source for sea temps, altimetry, currents, and watercolor at hiltonsoffshore.com. And also brought to you by Dixie Supply and Baker Metalworks are proud to be your metal roofing headquarters for over 40 years. Save time and money by buying from the most reliable manufacturer on the Gulf Coast. Buy it today, pick it up today. With the addition of their new store in Cantonment, Florida, they now have 8 locations to serve you. Dixie Supply and Baker Metalworks, your metal roofing headquarters. MB Ranch King hunting blinds and feeders are built to last, right here in the USA. With durability and convenience in mind, MB Ranch King's maintenance-free blinds are constructed with high-grade steel and come in a variety of sizes to meet any hunter's needs. Call Kevin today for more info or a quote at 205-807-2937. MB Ranch King, built in a pursuit of perfection.